Reading, he's dead? No, he's just sleeping, you dumb fuck. If you didn't see, I put a poll out, and most of you wanted me to read this first, and this is by B. Parker. It's a one-shot, about 3,000 words, and read by Present Mike. Here's the summary. Izuku is unconscious and won't wake up. His teachers and friends panic. Izuku and the vestiges are just vibing, though. Nana started when she heard a cry of matcha from Yoshi and Izuku's direction. Looking over at the duo, she spotted Izuku's dull green eyes, which had previously been looking at his uncle, staring back at her blearily, squinting slightly. She hated how dull they looked now, compared to the bright green color that she associated with her grandson, and to see them so lifeless now felt like a harsh slap to the face. The red rims underneath his eyes still had not faded, which was to be expected, and he looked more tired than before. She moved slightly to sit next to Yoshi, which had apparently noticed that Izuku was awake before she had. "Hey, kiddo, how are you feeling?" she asked Izuku softly, carting a hand through his hair. The boy leaned into the touch, eyes closing again as he did for a moment. She smiled softly at him, Yoshi doing the same. "I'm tired," he mumbled sleepily, opening his eyes to stare at his grandma again. Nana's smile soared slightly as she remembered just why he had been so tired. Deciding to not remind him of his panic attack, she settled on trying to steal him from Yoshi. Izuku smiled as they bickered playfully, Nana still carting her hand carefully through his hair. It would be all right, he thought, unaware of the panic he was causing elsewhere. In moments, Aizawa was kneeling next to his unconscious student. Even in his sleep, he was trembling gently, not unlike a person would after a panic attack. His pale, tear-stained face was twisted in an expression of pain. Not physical pain, though. He hated seeing that expression on Problem Child's usually vibrant face. Shota's hand shook slightly as he reached it out, checking Midoriya's pulse, not letting himself think about the possibilities that one of his students might be dead. He released a small, tense sigh of relief when he felt a pulse, though even in an unconscious state, it already seemed erratic and unsteady. It only added to his growing suspicion that Midoriya had seen what happened to his mother. He felt a small pang of sympathy at the idea of a child, because he knew that even with all he'd been through, Midoriya was still a child. Having to hear about their mother's death all alone, and presumably through a news station like Hizashi's had. Shota quickly turned his head, remembering that his husband was still in the doorway. "He's alive," he said, voice wavering slightly as he spoke. Hizashi let his tense shoulders relax slightly, exchanging a wordless look with Shota. He knew what it meant. Of course. Recovery girl? Shota nodded, leaning back down. He didn't remember getting up and lifting Midoriya. The kid didn't stir, merely shifting sleepily as he picked him up. The pro knew that Problem Child would often flinch away from others, even in his sleep, as the kids of 1A found out during a movie night. So for the kid to not even react, either he was in too deep of a sleep to notice, or he trusted Shota. He hoped it was the latter. The later. Knowing that Kaminari and Ashido would still be downstairs, and that more would have probably joined them, he directed his attention back to the other person in the room. "Zashi, can you get the other students back to their dorm rooms?" I think he, Shota nodded to the sleeping kid in his arms. "Deserves some privacy," he asked. Hizashi nodded at him, quickly turning on his heel and shutting the door behind him. Shota chuckled as he heard the voice hero's poor, yet funny, attempt at being quiet. He knew that Hizashi could be very silent when he wanted to be, having been scared shitless far more times than he would ever admit to. Tokiyami Fumikage did, in fact, actually believe in ghosts. He thought that if he could summon a little sentient shadow out of nowhere, and if one of his classmates could make explosives from their hands, yeah, ghosts probably existed somewhere in the world. Hell, one of his classmates was practically a ghost, being that she was invisible and such. Not that she was near death. He didn't think so, at least. Anyways, he was getting off topic. The topic he wanted to be on was one of his classmates, who he pretty sure was haunted. Fumikage was also pretty sure that this classmate knew that he was haunted, seeing as he never reacted to the weird things that happened around him. Yeah, he was talking about Midoriya Izuku. Dark Shadow, his companion, would tell him about such things. He would tell Fumikage about a weird particular thing that happened when he was getting an apple from the fridge, around when the dorms had first been installed. It was crazy, Fumi. One moment I had an apple in my hand, the next something like a tentacle. A tentacle grabbed my apple, he'd recounted with a pout after returning from his usual trip to the fridge one night. Though Fumikage was hesitant to believe him, considering his tendency to exaggerate his stories. Fumikage had sighed, deciding that if he could not fall asleep, as it happened a lot, then he might as well go check out what Dark Shadow was talking about. He knew it probably wasn't shoji. He didn't seem like he would take someone else's food unless it was an emergency. Once he reached the bottom of the stairwell, he immediately knew what Dark Shadow was talking about. Midoriya, who he'd recognized from his fluffy hair, was staring at him with wide, glowing eyes, his feet not quite touching the floor as he floated with an apple in his mouth. One that Fumikage would later confirm that he stole from Dark Shadow. Fumikage didn't get any sleep that night. So yeah, he knew something was up about the boy. He doubly knew something was up when he saw two of his senseis knocking on the boy's door, with Yamada sensei telling them all to go back to their rooms only minutes later. Fumikage knew not to intrude, but he couldn't help but be concerned for his classmate. Shota rubbed at his eyes, the ever-present aching resurfacing once again. He wished his husband could still be here, but alas, Hisashi had to go to the emergency meeting about the situation, while Shota was left watching over his problem child. Not that he would leave the kid's side, definitely not after Midoriya's panic attack, which was confirmed by Recovery Girl to have happened. Somehow, Problem Child hadn't woken up once, merely staying unconscious and therefore unaware, as he was carried from his room to the nurse's office. He had barely even stirred as Shota had set him down on the bed, as Recovery Girl did some basic tests on him. It scared Shota, if he was being honest. For a kid who always looked so vibrant around his classmates, he looked so much smaller when he was asleep, especially in this deep of sleep. The bags under his eyes suddenly seemed prominent, too prominent for it to have any place underneath a child's eyes, especially his problem child's eyes. While Recovery Girl had been checking over the child to make sure he had no injuries from falling on the ground, Shota had realized just how many scars the kid seemed to have. Ones that, yes, came from his quirk, but others that Shota didn't know where they came from, though the vaguely hand-shaped burn on Midoriya's shoulder invited an unwarranted thought, something he'd thought about a lot since the staff meeting. Didn't Bakugo and Midoriya go to the same junior high? It hadn't been long since the staff meeting, so Shota hadn't gotten the chance to request Midoriya or Bakugo's files from the rat-shaped Satan called Nezu. Yes, he should have had a file at the beginning of the school year, but he rarely read them unless something was amiss. Besides, he was always informed by Hisashi if a student had health problems, mental or physical. Even if Bakugo had bullied Midoriya, he couldn't see why. Much to Shota's ever-growing frustration, society favored those with strong emitter quirks and cast out those with mutant, or so-called villainous quirks. It annoyed him to no end. Midoriya didn't have an unlikable personality. He jumped at any chance to help others and never dragged anyone down, even if the boy himself was struggling. So why did a boy with both a strong emitter quirk and a likable personality show so much signs of being bullied? Time was wobbly here in the void. That was something the vestiges had first told Izuku, back when he just gotten used to seeing ghosts. Sometimes it could have only been mere hours outside, while for the past users it was months. Other times, though, it went too fast for anyone to comprehend. No one was happy about it, but it's not like they could do much about it. The reason Izuku started thinking about this in the first place is that it seemed weird how much time he was able to spend in the void with his family, because at this point they were his family, a weird, haunted, ghost one at that. Not that he was complaining. It felt nice to finally have a break after so long, but something fell off the entire time he was there. It was a couple of hours. At least that's what he thought it was. That Izuku realized what was so wrong. Nana? He whispered to the ghosts fearfully, the familiar feeling of panic clawing its way up to his throat. As his movements started to feel more sluggish, the terror he felt only increased tenfold. For all the time he spent in the void, never once had he been forced out of it. Not by the vestiges, not by his friends, not by anything else. Yet here he was, staring fearfully at his grandma's alarmed face as he quickly faded from the void, leaving no evidence that he had ever been there in the first place. Shota sighed, scratching his aching head slightly as he did so. He had been through many exhausting cases before, but maybe not one as mentally draining as this was, so far. While Midoriya had remained unconscious, it wasn't peaceful anymore. No, a thin sheen of sweat had covered the boy's face, his expression twisting into one of fear. He'd been restless for the last hour, twitching whenever Shota had gotten too close to him. He felt a pang in his heart as Midoriya flinched, a full body flinch that might easily get mistaken for a twitch. Compared to the amount of terror that had taken over his face, it could be assumed that even in his sleep, Midoriya was trying to appear smaller, something he'd seen the boy do a lot. It was sudden movements that caught Shota's attention fully. Midoriya jolting in surprise, an action that had barely been smothered, followed by Midoriya lurching upwards, a barely quieted scream echoing around the infirmary. The ear-piercing shriek filled the small room quickly, making Shota's panic increase tenfold by just how loud Midoriya's screams could be. He quickly jumped out of the plastic chair he'd settled in earlier, standing beside the hunched-over kid, who was still screaming. He placed a hand on Midoriya's shoulder, which seemed to have the opposite effect of what Shota had wanted, only making him scream louder and quicken his already unsteady breathing. Midoriya, he tried, but Problem Child didn't hear him, merely grabbing onto his hair and tugging it. Midoriya, he tried again louder, grabbing onto Midoriya's hands to get him to stop tugging at his damn hair. It worked a little, making him breathe a little more, but did little to prevent his quirk from acting up, which Shota was quick to erase. In the little time of his quirk that had appeared, Shota had spotted long black tendrils shooting out of his back for a second. They had looked similar to the ones he'd seen not that long ago, though he had dismissed the whole experience as a sleep-deprived hallucination. Maybe this was the same. Finally, Shota gave in and sat on the bed with the boy, gently pushing his legs so he could sit. Midoriya, who had stopped screaming when his quirk was erased, stared at him with wide, unseeing eyes for a moment, then silently crawled so that he was slightly curled into the older man's side, falling asleep almost instantly. Hisashi approached the infirmary door, a folder underneath his arm, and registered the loud silence from inside, one that he associated with the aftermath of some sort of chaos, which did not sit right with Hisashi. He knew that it was very unlikely for any villain to have attacked, but maybe something had happened with the little listener. Knocking lightly on the door to announce his arrival, he pushed it open quietly. The small creak of the door seemed much louder in the quietness of the infirmary, making him wince at the thought of waking someone up. As he started to make his way down the row of beds, he thought about the silence and what could have happened. There was no sound of near silent snores, as there probably would be if Shota was sleeping, nor were there sounds of someone talking, even if it was softly. Though it was not an eerie silence, it was a rather peaceful one that soothed the worry that rushed its way through the hero's veins. The put-together look of the room suggested that while no one was harmed physically, it might be a different story mentally. He was drawn out of his thoughts by his husband's voice, though it seemed like he wasn't talking to Hisashi. "Wonder what set him off," Shota murmured, which caused a bit of concern to bloom in Hisashi's heart. He hoped he was not right about Midoriya having a panic attack. The hope soon went down the drain as he turned the corner, catching a small look at his student's tear-stained face before he turned to face his husband, who was looking down at the listener with an expression that Hisashi could only describe as worry. It felt oddly out of place on his husband's usual stoic face. "Did something happen?" he whispered so he wouldn't wake the kid up. Hisashi nodded, which calmed Hisashi slightly, because at least he would know that what had happened to his favorite listener. Izuku opened his eyes again, the bright light searing against his eyes, so he closed them. The small bouts of whispers that had been going on and off since he regained some level of consciousness quickly died out, turning into slightly louder voices after a minute. After some time, Izuku couldn't tell how long of complete nonsense, he began to recognize the words they were saying to him, which sounded more like a question. Finally, one made it through his pain-hazed mind. "Lights dimmed?" it asked, which confused Izuku slightly at the cutoff of it. Though he understood what it wanted from him, he nodded, the action being accompanied by some dull pain. Izuku opened his eyes again, no longer wincing at the now dimmed light. Looking around, he quickly recognized the familiar walls of the nurse's office, which he was unfortunately used to seeing. He also spotted the two other people in the room, which made him slightly uncomfortable at the fact that two of his teachers had seen him sleep. Izuku knew how he looked when he slept, how twitchy he got. "Are you all right, problem child?" Aizawa-sensei asked him, an unfamiliar soft edge to his tone. Izuku almost nodded, but was reminded of how terrible that idea was with the incessant thudding on his head, which was probably a migraine given how high his pain tolerance was, or maybe the fall from passing out gave him a concussion. He jolted when a finger pressed his hand, though it wasn't a harsh prod, more of a soft poke. Izuku blushed slightly and embarrassed it when he realized he hadn't answered Sensei's question, and to be honest, he didn't really want to talk about it anymore, especially not when he felt like shit. "Midoriya?" Aizawa-sensei asked again, something akin to concern bleeding into his usual gruff tone. Izuku's chest tightened at that, as it was an odd thing for a teacher to be concerned about him, though maybe it was because he had a quirk. He didn't want to think bad of Aizawa-sensei, but all the past experiences in his life showed that if anyone knew that he used to be quirkless, he would go right back to how he was treated in Aldera. Again, Izuku didn't answer his teacher, simply choosing to stare emptily at his hands. A hand rested on his own hand, making him nearly jump out of his bed. "Kid, I can't help if I don't know what's wrong, Aizawa-sensei said, crouching on the ground so that he was looking Izuku directly in the eyes. Izuku started to shake, silent tears falling freely even as he tried to contain them. It didn't help, merely making him shake worse than before. Izuku's voice was broken, sounding only like an echo of what it used to be. The long-played facade of happiness was now gone, replaced by what he truly was, a broken, crying, pathetic boy. I can't. He tried again. Even though the words practically knocked the wind out of him, it would hurt too much to even tell them that something was wrong. Never mind trying to tell them what was wrong. That would involve Bakugo and what he's done to Izuku. That would involve One for All and the vestiges. That would involve All Might and his words to Izuku on the roof. He didn't want to go through that again. The world went black as Izuku passed out once again. I think we can both agree that he needs a lot of therapy, Hisashi asked weakly, watching with small giggles as his husband tried to free himself from the green bean's strong grip on his arm. For a small boy who had just had 3 panic attacks in one day, he had a surprisingly strong grip. Never underestimate him, I guess, Hisashi mused slightly. You're telling me, Hisashi said with a raised eyebrow, having momentarily stopped his struggle to get free. In the couple of seconds he stopped struggling, Midoriya, who was still asleep, took this as a sign to tug Shota closer to him. Hisashi could barely contain his laughter as his husband sighed in resignation and joined the child on the bed. Hisashi snickered quietly as he took a couple of photos of the two cuddling for both blackmail and revenge from when Shota sent a picture of him with the cat stuck in his hair. Unbeknownst to the loud bird of a man, Shota wasn't complaining. He knew that his student was struggling and had been for a long time, though he didn't know just how long that was, and if Shota could provide his student with some comfort, even in his sleep, Shota would happily do so. As long as no one sends those pictures to Nomuri, I swear to Kami Hisashi. All for one, better known as Midori Hisashi, was smart. He'd always been top of his class, top of anything he was in, really. That being said, he was not wise. The proof for that? His plan. Step 1, kill Midoriya Inko, which he had already done. Step 2, kidnap Midoriya Izuku, One for All's successor. Step 3, erase his memories. Step 4, make him a villain. He thought that it was a foolproof plan, but All for One didn't take into account was 7 ghosts to come after him, all looking suspiciously like One for All's past users, who all hurled very particular and weird insults at him. Deciding that he would very much like to keep his crotch intact, he stopped going after Midoriya Izuku. Alright everyone, that's the end of this one shot entitled He's Dead. No, he's just sleeping, you dumb fuck. This was a really good one, I believe. I really liked all the details and the relationship between Aizawa and Izuku. Anyways, that's all of Aizawa Podfics for the day. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all soon.